Hi, this is Nick Dawson, the editor-in-chief of Talkhouse Film, and you're listening to the Talkhouse Film podcast. You wouldn't necessarily expect Mike Cahill and Cary Fukunaga to be friends. They were born and raised on opposite coasts, and as filmmakers are strikingly different. Cahill made his mark in 2011 with Another Earth, starring his regular collaborator Britt Marling. And his new film now in theatres, I Origins, continues his preoccupation with making emotionally acute movies that ask big, cosmic questions about who we are and the world we live in. Fukunaga, on the other hand, is drawn to darker material, the epic immigrant drama Sin Nombre, his unconventional Jane Eyre, True Detective, and also Beasts of No Nation, the new film he just wrapped about boy soldiers in Africa. Cahill and Fukunaga have, though, been friends for years, and as two emerging filmmakers living in New York, have a shared history that is all too evident when they speak. We put them together for a podcast, and as with all good conversations, it took some surprising and fascinating turns. To say any more would be to ruin what you're about to hear. We connected them when Cahill was at a film festival in Pula, Croatia, and Fukunaga had just returned to New York City from Ghana, but the many thousands of miles and 6-hour time difference separating them didn't seem to be a hindrance at all.
What's up, Cary Fukunaga? How you doing, man?
Oh, man, I love that laugh. So, man, I'm really stoked we could do this little conversation. I wanted to start off with a really generic question for you.
All right.
You ready?
Wait, can I first say thank you so much for doing this? You are my friend, but you are also one of the greatest filmmakers of our generation, motherfucker. And that's wonderful. And so I'm really, really honored, brother, man.
Thank you very much, man.
What was question number one?
Okay, so question number one, all right. I wanted to ask you, what has been your biggest challenge to date to become the filmmaker you are now?
The biggest challenge to date to become the filmmaker I am today. I started off making short films at Georgetown. One of the things is that you don't have a voice until you do it for a while, you know? And it's not until like very recently I'm starting to even discover what that voice may be.
Well, how would you describe that voice then? Because I'm always curious about the idea of voice. And I still feel like when I'm making movies, it's all practice still.
Yeah, so, it's so funny. I remember when we were on the boat on your boat in the Hudson, and Rob Meyer was there, and the boat was like about to sink or like blowing in the wind, and he was like, "Cary, you've made 2 narrative features. You can die okay." And he was like, "Mike, you've made 1, and I haven't made 1 yet." And I keep thinking, like, my gosh, it's so hard to do these things. It's like step by step. But my voice, I don't know. I think I'm interested in.
For anyone listening, it's a very small boat, by the way. It's basically a rowboat.
Yeah, that yacht, like when we dropped off from the helicopter, like afterwards, like.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I'm interested in philosophical questions, the idea of the self. I realized, it sort of takes a couple of things to like stand back and then look at it. And I realized Another Earth and I Origins are both questions about where the self ends, and if there is this thing called the self. And I was thinking about Polanski's The Apartment, or no, The Tenant. What is that film? I think it's The Tenant. And he says, like, if you cut off your legs, you say, "My legs and I." If you cut off your arms, you say, "It's my arms and I." But if you cut off your head, you say, "My body and I," or "My head and I." And that kind of stuff like thrills me. I'm interested in, the sense of self, and if it actually has any meaning whatsoever.
Have you ever gone to analysis?
No. Like for my brain?
For your brain, for your feelings. I'm just curious. The same way, like I sort of feel like that your films, my films, whatever films one is writing, is some other expression of your, is it the id or the ego? And the thing about art is that it has to be driven by the ego, but is the expression from something else.
Well, there's a big cutoff between your conscious mind and the unconscious mind, and that really interests me because your unconscious mind is really dictating a lot of your behaviors and your choices. And as much as you feel like you have free will, even as a director, or a creator, storyteller, like I think a lot of triggers and unconscious things are motivating and moving our hand in some ways. And so that's when you kind of step back and you're not even actually fully, it feels like I'm not fully in control of all of that.
Yeah,
that's sort of abstract.
But do you feel like that, especially once you're doing your work, like it's not something you're definitely in control of it when you're conceptualizing an idea and that first initial excitement of a new story idea. But then, are you talking about that more once you start doing it? Because I think you and I have talked about this before. Remember when we tried writing that one day, that cafe in Williamsburg, and we're just talking about how hard it is to get started, but once you get started, it comes from somewhere else. I definitely experience that when I'm writing. When I start writing a scene, something else takes over as I'm typing, because the typing is the speed of my typing is pretty much at the speed of my thoughts, and at a certain point, something else takes away. Like I've written things into scenes that were totally not planned and didn't come as an idea before I was writing it.
Oh my gosh, totally. Actually, in this scene, you made me think about the scene where Sophie comes into the lab and she starts talking about the worms. And she says, and it was weird because this is one of the like final scenes that I wrote. I kind of slotted it into Origins originally as just description, like she comes into the lab and these things happen, but I skipped it. And I remember when I sat down to write that scene, I didn't know what it was going to be, and now it's like the whole meaning of the movie for me, which is, or like it's the key to the science meets spirituality.
Yeah, what was it that she said that she was upset about in the lab? Was it about the hurting of the worms?
Well, no, she says, I mean, at first she starts off with that, but she says, like, you torture these worms. But then but the purpose, or when she uses what he's doing in the laboratory to explain her POV. And she says, how many senses do these worms have? And he says, 2, smell and touch. And she says, and you modify them to have vision. So prior to this, they don't have vision. So there's a whole entire dimension that they don't have access to that we are very well aware of, and that it is influencing the dimensions that they do have access to. Or the sensor, like light can warm up an apple and make it smell delicious to a worm, and then the worm can follow that. And like that's how coincidences can work. There's a rhythm to it. Or there's like there can totally be, it follows logically that 5 senses are by no means the limit of what a human can, by no means the limit in which an organism or anything can experience, or that there are. And those other realms, which we would call the spiritual, like we have to, that's the word that we've come up with to describe the metaphysical realm that still is affecting our, the 5 dimensions which we do participate in.
I absolutely agree with that. Mainly because I've experienced ghosts in my life. Yeah, I've definitely experienced ghosts multiple times and learned things from experiences that I couldn't have known just by chance. Can
you tell a story of a ghost?
Sure, I could tell. The clearest one where I learned something in the experience that I couldn't have known was in Mexico City. I had just arrived to start pre-production for Sin Nombre. I'd been there many times, and there was just one hotel in this old part of town that I would stay at to write sometimes. And I decided to stay there as my initial place before I found an apartment in Mexico City. And it's an old building. It's an old hacienda from the 1700s in the middle of town. And hacienda is probably the wrong word for it, but those old kind of Spanish buildings that had a courtyard in the middle. And I was kind of stressed and kind of anxious, and I went to bed, around 1 a.m, and I woke up because I heard crying, and it was this weird, almost like phasing sound of crying, where it'd come close and then go away and come close again. And at first I thought it was in the room next to me, and then I realized it was in the room with me, the crying, and it sounded like a baby crying, and there was this kind of like staticky, like a record player kind of sound that went with it that sort of like distorted it, like popping and scratching kind of a sound. And then, the hair on my back stood up, and I was awake. So I didn't turn and look at where the sound was coming from. Instead, I reached out to my laptop and I turned on iTunes just to play some music to try to settle me, and just focused on the music until I could fall asleep again. So in the morning, I go and talk to the concierge, and I say, "Hey, is there a family in the room next to me?" Even though I knew it wasn't in the room next to me. And he said, "No, you're all alone in your side of the hotel." And I was like, "I'm like, this is gonna sound crazy, but you don't have ghosts here, do you?" He's like, "Oh, no, of course not. There's no ghosts here." And I'm like, "Oh, that's weird because I heard this baby crying." He's like, "Oh, that's the little boy. He won't bother you." And I was like, "Can I change rooms?" And so I changed rooms that night, and it's a really small hotel. There's only probably 6 people there, and I was eating dinner that night, the following day, and the hotel staff came up and talked to me, and they asked me what I'd experienced, and I told them, that what had happened, and they said that sometimes a woman walks through the restaurant as well, and I said, "Well, why is this place haunted?" And they said that in the 1930s or 40s, the building was abandoned, and transients lived there, and there was a fire. And a family burned to death in the side of the hotel that I was in, and they had a 3-year-old boy. And then that's when I realized, not only did I hear the boy crying from the fire, but that crackling and popping sound I heard wasn't static like a record player. It was the sound of fire.
Wow.
So there are those things that somehow every now and then we tune into, and we don't know what they are. I'm not saying that this ghost had a conscious power or anything. It might have just been a reflection of an event that remains, but there are definitely the senses that we aren't fully aware of yet. I mean, even in the senses that we do have, like in sight, there are spectrums of light that we cannot see.
Right, like infrared and everything. Yeah. Well, what's crazy about that story, and those kind of stories happen, like, how do you move on with life without holding on, how do you go back to normal life, tables and chairs and reality, when an experience like that happens? One has to, obviously, and part of life is like ignoring that. It's like the same sort of thing when you see injustice in the world, and then you don't see injustice in the world, and you have to go about your life without, negotiating between the anger one feels towards injustice and having to tie your shoes and shave or whatever. It's weird, the idea to experience that sort of metaphysical thing and then just be like, all right, here we go, back to
Yeah,
going to Starbucks.
It's always about scaling our experience, right? I don't think the human mind, as it is right now, is able to cope with much more than what we do on a daily basis. It's the same reason when you're camping or something, and you're someplace and you see the stars, and for a second you're able to feel. And I think it's always a feeling inside of yourself. You feel the immensity of it all. You feel what infinity is, and then it's gone. It's it's a fraction of a second, and it's gone. In the same way that when we like to sit and look at vistas. Why do we like to look at vistas? It gives us a second to take in more than our normal world allows us, but always in short bursts. I feel the same way about history, though. It's to feel the scale of history is nearly impossible. Where you are right now.
History of the Earth, like the 14 billion years, or the humanity 50,000 years, civilization 3,000 years. Yeah, I guess all of it's kind of fractal. It keeps going.
Yeah, I mean, where you are, there's got to be ruins of the Roman Empire somewhere.
Right.
And
Brioni, for example, there's Roman ruins.
And the Romans, everything we are today, the dramas that we depict in our films, was the same kind of stuff they were writing in their stories. That hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed is our ability to Google things we don't know, and to travel places faster, and maybe some medicine. It's they had hot water plumbing on Santorini 3,000 plus years ago. It's crazy to imagine the starts and resets we've had as civilization. But then you look at 3,000 years as nothing when you look at the age of a rock, or a piece of obsidian or a petrified tree, But it's. Go ahead.
It's interesting. We had a conversation before about the dinosaur footprints. That was something that kind of struck me here when I was here a couple summers ago in Croatia. The Roman ruins, and you can see you see how the civilization laid out the streets and organized this small city, and it was the center marketplace, and it's the center of cultural life was on this this location on Brioni, for this particular city. And right next to it, on the beaches, on the beach rocks, there were dinosaur footprints, a series of them.
Yeah.
And it was it was kind of this like profound moment, or for me, where I thought, this civilization had risen and fallen, and they didn't know what they didn't know what dinosaurs were, and they may have had myths of dragons. You brought that up before, the myths of dragons and stories of giant beasts. Paleontology didn't start till 1810 or something like that, and there was no concept that these are 200 million year old like giant lizards that were then eradicated by a giant meteorite that hits the Yucatan. And for me, that was really inspiring for this film, like sort of coming back to it in that sense, is that I was thinking, well, what's our civilization's dinosaur footprints? What may we rise and fall without ever knowing the significance of? And yet throughout our history and our culture, it's had, poets have wrestled with it, scientists, religious people, and stories and narratives have been created about the eyes and some sort of metaphysical encoding, or the eye of Horus, or the eye is the window of the soul, greatest cliche of all time. But it's not until the late 80s that we actually started cataloging irises in a database. And so that's where this sort of narrative was drawn from. History.
I always like how you start, especially when you're writing something at dinner parties. You throw it out like this bit of science that you've just learned about to gauge not only the audience's reaction to it, but the questions that they poke holes into it.
Wait, were we at that one where I was kind of talking about the aliens?
Oh yeah. How many alien races are there again?
4. There's there's 4 with interstellar space travel technology. There's the Tetrans from the Pleiades. The tall whites, as they're known, are the Nordic aliens.
But your stories are always laced with a bit of like truth as well. Like I did look up after that dinner party, the Canadian was he a general? Defense minister.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, tell the people what you're talking about.
To contextualize, so I've written, actually, now the script's done. I wrote a story. It's a story about extraterrestrials in the Milky Way galaxy, and it's sort of based on, this is a great word, panspermia theory. It kind of sounds like a science porn. But panspermia.
Or a really huge facial.
Exactly. I mean, I don't know how the idea came to me, but anyway. And then, but the idea is that life, there's a theory that life originated on Earth, which is 4.5 billion years ago. The universe is 14 billion years, more or less, and life originated 4.5 billion years ago. But simultaneously, so that, like from the primordial soup, as it were. Like
are you going to talk about the Great Explosion?
The Great Explosion, exactly, which then sent little like sperms or like little microorganisms, like tiny single-celled organisms throughout the galaxy on these meteorites. And on Earth around 4.5 billion years ago, we also were collided with a ton of meteors. So the notion would be that carbon-based DNA, RNA life would exist on all these Earth-like planets within the Milky Way, which, scientists in the last, actually since Another Earth came out, there have been the discovery of and confirmation of 2,000 other Earths and in our Milky Way. And there's an idea that there's, perhaps millions of Earth-like planets, in the Goldilocks zone with rocks, water, and the ability to sustain life as we know it. Carbon-based life. And so then, and the sort of trajectory of the species on biodiversity and the species on life is like there's that sequence in Noah that's actually the best part of that movie, which is the where it shows the microorganisms. And we all know the story of they turn into salamanders and they climb out onto the water and then they split into reptiles and mammals. But that would occur all over. That's not completely arbitrary. There's sort of a survival of the fittest rule to it, that once you evolve an eyeball, for example, you're more powerful than all the blind species. Once you have legs, you're more powerful than et cetera, et cetera. And so all these particular species would exist, similar, not terribly different, among these Earth-like planets in the Milky Way galaxy. And 4 of them have interstellar space travel, and a number of them have sentience. Blah, blah, blah.
What do you think drives that interest, that curiosity? And then how does that relate then to why you tell stories or how you live your life?
I think, well, that's a great question. And I think that the only thing we are is our narrative. And this is something like the Talk House had me write a small piece about, or asked me to write a small piece on Coherence, which is this new film that came out that was really, really, really clever, really thoughtful. And it was about string theory and like meeting like multiple U's, like dozens and dozens and potentially millions of U's. And it made me think about how, we aren't even ourselves. String theory is like the theory of the multiverse existing and there being many, many universes. And if there's so many U's, if there's a billion, trillion, gabillion, infinite number of U's, like Cary Fukunaga's, can you believe it? There's that many. The difference among all of them is their narrative, right? Your narrative of your life and your narrative is what defines you, not your molecules, not your phobias or fears or desires. It's really just, what you tell yourself is you. And I feel like, religion being one of the greatest stories of all time, different religions across the globe having hundreds of millions of followers, the top 5, I don't know what all the top 5 religions are. You get this sense that like a lot of it is narrative to kind of like make us feel peaceful. And existentialists and the great existentialist writers always thought that it was the task of the artist to make meaning. It's our responsibility to make meaning. Otherwise, there is no meaning. And so I like to tell stories that are minimalist sci-fi that almost you could believe they're real, to then make us give comfort ultimately, or like lessen a primal existential fear. In Origins, it's the fear of death or the pain of losing someone. So to like diminish that just a little bit if possible. And in Another Earth, it was the fear of like intense singular loneliness, and the desire for connection through empathy. And those are things that narratives do, is they kind of give us comfort. Like I like the comforting narratives, the ones that make us feel like, oh shit, it's not that bad.
I somehow find the darker narratives. Okay, let me ask you this. So if our narrative is what defines us and separates us from all our repetitive selves, how do you live your life? How do you live a fuller life then? What is your version of the best possible narrative for yourself?
Well, this is something I remember. Something you said many years ago on the terrace of the spot in the West Village with a guitar, I'm deciding to live my life well and enjoy it. And it was such a like simple statement, but like that really stuck with me. I was thinking about that. I've decided to live my life well and enjoy it. And that means not being numb, surrounding myself with people that I love, and that's kind of it. Surround myself with people. I fell in love. I'm Jelena, and life is beautiful. And I'm in Croatia next to the beach at a film festival, which is kind of nice. Talking to you on the Talk House, that's pretty good, I'd say. And to engage, like to not sort of, to not blind myself until I'm gone.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the narrative. But it's like I'm also interested in the fact that the mind is so malleable. Like you can't really trust your narrative that much, and maybe this is just a feeling of being on a press tour. Like I've been in so many cities where you kind of forget which city you're in, and especially if you're not the one doing the driving of the car or the flying of a plane, like you are actually kind of like you close your eyes and you're in another place already because you're like yearning for sleep. It makes for very disjointed narrative of like, wait, when did was that in Dallas or was that in Chicago or was that in Boston? No, that was Toronto. Wait, no, was that,
That goes to scale again, doesn't it? Like how much we're able to compute.
There's that great torture device. Have you ever read Douglas Adams' The Life Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Maybe it was. There's like a torture device in it, and the whole they would put people in it. It was called the Total Perspective Vortex, maybe. And the idea is the simple thing is it just shows the entire universe, and then it puts a little dot that says "You are here" to show you how insignificant you are. And anyone who went into it would lose their brain, except for this one guy. They put it, and then he walked out. He was like, I control a pretty significant portion of the universe. I'm not that bad. His ego was increased.
He probably already was a sociopath.
Yeah, exactly.
I was going to ask you something. Oh, it was actually something I talked about on Saturday night when I first got back, and I saw like Rob and Amir and all them, and I was just talking about spontaneously in a little toast was I don't think we exist at all unless we exist in the memory of our friends. So in a way, it's like we're all sort of like, reference files on a timeline, and like we don't exist unless our friends are there to remind us that we exist. Friends and family, obviously. What is a memory if you're the only one that knows it?
Yeah, right. It's a dream, or What got you into directing? By the way, I never knew this story of like when you started.
I wrote my first short story like when I was like 10, probably, that I wanted to make into a movie.
No kidding.
Planned it out, yeah. And then I think I wrote my first screenplay when I was 14 because I learned how to type while I was doing it. Because it was taking too long to hunt and peck. But of course, it was a Civil War story.
Really? Seriously?
Yeah.
So cool.
I don't know how other than I needed to, like my mind needed to write and make stories and tell stories. And there were always somehow these epically difficult ones to do for no money. So I'm still trying to learn how to write a simpler, cheaper story that I can do with less resources. Somehow a scene always gets put in with a train with like 500 people on it. Or
oh my gosh, I love that. That movie's so good, man. That movie is so good.
Oh, thanks, dude. But I don't know. I can't see myself doing anything other than directing, even though oftentimes I find directing so painfully difficult. Just how much it takes out of you. And then you ask yourself, well, okay, what am I doing? Why? I hope to God that it does provide some kind of meaning. But at the same time, I feel like it's people. I think people's imagination of what directing is to what it actually is vastly different. So,
you mean like the chair and you sit there with a megaphone and kind of like
yeah.
Get massages all day long. That's what my sets are like.
I remember when there was a massage lady that came like the last day of shooting on Jane Eyre, and I was so shocked. I was like, this is amazing. I have no time for this. All the other people in the crew got it.
Man, that's cool.
But do you see yourself still directing movies 40 years from now?
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. I mean, 40 years from now, how old would I be? 75 years old. I hope so. I hope, you know what? I hope at 75 I'm like trying to push some limits. The fun part for me is trying to do some new stuff, even if they're small little things. Like experimenting in the actual movie or trying to do, like in this movie, we have a double vertigo shot. I was really like excited to do, or like visual deja vu, which was something I wasn't really sure whether it would work or not. But
how did you do visual deja vu? I saw the double Zolly.
Oh, the double dolly. Yeah. The visual deja vu. It's the, so I had this theory that deja vu comes from compositional repetition. So like if not the same things, but things spaced similarly and objects placed in a room and composition basically repeated, but the dressings being different. And so in this film, I wanted to test that out because wanted the audience to get deja vu or be like to not have it and then all of a sudden get it. And so what we did is we took a lot of pains to design, and we were, initially we were going to build this, but we just did some build-ons on the set, on a live set, which is to make the hallway in New York and the hallway in India, the placement of the hotel room in India and the placement of the apartment in New York and the placement of the elevator all in the same composition, and the window in the back and the camera movement to be the same. So one's New York, a New York loft and elevator, and one's India, this posh hotel, elevator, window, light coming in from the window. Everything is precisely like mapped out. 2/3 of the way down on the right side is the hotel room, 2/3 of the way down is the hallway, so that when they enter that space in that composition, Ian and Salamina, it will trigger subconsciously up your spine, hopefully, is the idea. You won't even be able to place why you feel deja vu, but you do feel deja vu. And I feel like it worked. I mean, I don't know. I feel like it worked to some degree, and that was exciting because that was something.
Well, it should work, on the unconscious level. So
exactly, that's the point. It's supposed to happen so you don't think.
If you're aware of it, then
it's problematic. Yeah, precisely.
We had a lot of kids on Beast of No Nation because, it's obviously about boy soldiers. And apart from the main kid, we had a whole cadre of young boys who were part of this theater group that we trained. That didn't exist before that, but we created like a theater group. The ones that glowed are the ones that came with us to film. And, a lot of times they're just sitting there observing things. So it was pretty amazing about halfway through the shoot where I caught them. They were redoing scenes that we'd already shot and impersonating like Idris Elba and doing it really well. And just laughing amongst themselves, but like, as kids would, but they were acting.
That's
and
so
they knew
cool.
all the lines. Other kids did different parts. And it's like some of these kids can't even read, so they just did it by memory.
That's amazing.
So then I had them do it on camera. So I put it in the movie.
I'm so excited to see it. How long were you in production on that?
I was on production. That was 7 weeks of shooting.
I'm so impressed, man. You finished True Detective and jumped right into making a movie. That's like kind of hardcore.
Yeah. Not advisable. So, and this goes actually to how much do you believe in the philosophies of your films, first off?
Well, in this film, I try and like respectively show both sides, and I feel like the worm scene is my philosophy, is my feeling on life. So very much so in this. It's hard. I feel like a umbilical cord connected to the meaning of the film, and that's why it's I would have a hard time making a film that's not a film that I wrote if I didn't totally jive with philosophy. Why?
Yeah, well, okay, so my family's Buddhist, right? Japanese, and my father was raised Buddhist, and grandparents Buddhist. I've watched them meditate their whole lives. So reincarnation is definitely a part of that belief. And my little sister is adopted from Kazakhstan, and early in her life, she went to a baseball game with my dad and a couple friends, and they were talking about a book they were reading, and suddenly she started talking about this book. Like she knew all about the book. It was the friend who was talking, not my dad. So it's not a book that existed in the household. Mm-hmm. And she knew the story. She knew what it was about. She knew the author. And my dad asked her, because it wasn't a new book, wouldn't have commercials about it. This is before really. She was like 7 years old. My dad asked her, well, how do you know these things?
Huh.
She's like, I don't know. I just know it. And it was one of those like spooky moments where you just sort of realized, whoa, she didn't glean this from somewhere else. This is a memory that predates this life somehow.
That's amazing.
And maybe that's also what makes children such great actors when they can, because they're able to tap into experiences that they've never had before, and pathos as well.
Right. And they're really good at pretend, but it feels like it is a tapping into something on another domain. That's like there's no question there's another domain. Like it seems like you and your family have experienced that stuff, and you just kind of put it into wheelhouse of living. But like whenever I have telepathic moments, which happen every now and then, you know, when you're with someone and you're like, you completely connect with what they're thinking. Or once I was in DC when I was working at National Geographic, I used to drive a Vespa from my place to Geo. And one time I usually locked it up, and one time I didn't lock it up, and I went in. I was only going to go in for like 5 minutes and grab something. I ended up staying there for like 4 hours. And when I went outside, my bike was stolen. And I was like, no. And suddenly I had this flash in my head. And my body was like, Mike, just start walking this way. And so I like started walking down the street in DC. Then my body was like, Mike, turn left. And I took a left. I started walking, and it was like, take a right. And I kept walking and walking. I walked for like 30 minutes maybe. And I turned the corner, and my bike was sitting right there at a park. And like my knees started shaking. And it was like I had flashes of it in this park that led me there. Then I walked up to it. I stuck my key and turned it on and drove home. And I have no explanation for that.
Did no one try to stop you from driving it away?
No, because I had the key. Because whoever jacked it, like, wired it, you know, or whatever. They, like, they took the front off and, like, put the wires together. Like, I don't know how to jack a bike, actually, but I know that the key was still in my pocket. And those kind of things, like, I can't, like, I always try and, whenever that happens, I'm, like, trying to figure it out. But, like, Yelena, for example, was like, you know, just, like, don't ask too many questions. Just go with it.
That's so Yelena. Oh man. Well, man, I'm looking forward to watching your movies for the next 40 years.
Thanks, and like vice versa.
Any kind of conversation that can be sparked, anything where your story is more than just the trite, repetitive stuff that most of the Hollywood films are, stories we've seen over and over again, but instead stories that make us ask questions of ourselves and our own existence. Those are the ones that add meaning to life, as you said. So I hope you keep making movies until you die. I hope when you die, it'll be decades and decades from now.
Thank you, brother. And then maybe I'll come back and make a couple more. And man, I really appreciate you doing this. And I'm psyched to see Beasts, man.
I think we'll have an assembly in a couple weeks, man. So I can't wait to show it to you. Get your advice.
Yeah, beautiful, dude. I'm psyched, man. All right, well, I guess that wraps it up for the Talk House podcast.
Go have a swim for me, man. Go have a swim.
Oh, yeah.
And go play in some dinosaur prints.
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna do some editing.
We're about to premiere, actually. I got to run off to the premiere.
Oh.
3,000-year-old amphitheater. Boom.
Don't forget to put on your pants.
Oh, right. I should do that now. I've been doing this completely nude. I hope that's all right.
I could feel you, man. I could feel you across the void.
Through another dimension.
All right. Send my love to Yelena and the baby, and I'll see you soon.
All right. Later, brother.
Hi, this is Nick Dawson from Talkhouse Film, and you've been listening to Mike Cahill and Cary Fukunaga in conversation on the Talkhouse Film podcast. For more filmmakers talking about film and TV, go to film.thetalkhouse.com.
Hi, my name is Cary Fukunaga, and I'm also... No, I tell you, fucked that up, didn't I? Talkhouse Film Podcast. My name is Cary Fukunaga.